to our channel. My name is Alina, and together with my team of professionals, I'm excited to introduce our newest sewing pattern, the bold and feminine fly skirt. This asymmetric skirt features a flared hem and can be sewn in denim, shirting fabric, or even lightweight materials for a softer, more fluid look. In this tutorial, we'll walk you through the step-by-step construction of the fly skirt using our sewing pattern available in our Etsy shop, link in the description, along with more information and resources. Let's get started.
After printing the pattern, you will see the info box in front of you. You will see 6 size markings on it. You need to find your size and determine which line represents it. My size is 40, and it is marked by this line. Next, I will show you how to select your size on the waistband and transfer all necessary notches, markings, and seam allowances included in this pattern. First, find your size line on the right edge of the waistband. In our case, it is represented by this dashed line, and we locate it here. In our case, size 40 is right here. And here is our line. Then, find your size marking at the top of the waistband. Here it is. Next, locate your size markings along the bottom of the waistband. Here is the center back seam. Then, the size marking for the left and right side seams. Trace the piece along your size line. I also traced the small alignment numbers to correctly join the waistband with the waist seam of the skirt. These markings are also on the skirt pieces and must align. Marking 4 aligns with the inner side of the placket on the left front skirt piece. Marking 5 aligns with the left side seam. Marking 6 aligns with the center back seam. Marking 7 aligns with the right side seam. Marking 8 aligns with the inner edge of the placket on the right front skirt piece. Marking 8 is placed near the smaller size before yours. To mark it for your size, measure 4 cm from the right edge of the waistband. The marking on the right waistband edge is for aligning 2 waistband pieces. You can also mark placements for snaps. Snaps on the left side of the waistband are the same for all sizes. Next, mark the seam allowances that are already included in the pattern. The allowances are marked on the pattern, and in this area, it is 1 cm. Mark them inward from the edge. This is how the piece will look with marked seam allowances. Seam allowances are marked along the entire contour, including the right waistband edge. Here it is marked. The pattern also includes interfacing zones. They are indicated by gray dots. Interfacing areas are marked on the waistband and front skirt pieces for placket duplication. Each pattern piece has large numbers. These numbers indicate piece placement on the fabric layout. After selecting your waistband size, marking all necessary points, and adding stitching lines, you can cut the piece along the red line. For sewing the skirt, you will need the following materials. Main fabric. Fabric recommendations for this skirt can be found in the instructions. In our case, we are using this type of cotton. Next, you will need fusible or woven interfacing. You will also need thread matching the fabric color for seam finishing and stitching. Additionally, 1 spool of contrasting thread for top stitching. To install snap fasteners, you will need this type of press for setting metal hardware. You will need a 12 mm die for it. And also snaps, which consist of 4 parts. If you don't have a press for installing metal hardware, you can replace the closure with buttonholes and buttons. You can also have the snaps installed at a tailor shop. For making a button and buttonhole closure, you will need a special presser foot for buttonholes. And you will also need to choose buttons. Tools you will need during the process. Fabric scissors. Paper scissors. Snippers or thread clippers. Also, a measuring tape. Ruler. Heat erasable pen or tailor's chalk. Since our fabric is light-colored, a heat-erasable pen works best, and a standard pincushion with pins. For sewing this skirt, I will be using denim needles since our fabric is quite dense. It is important to choose the correct needle. Equipment needed for sewing this skirt: a regular sewing machine and an overlocker. If you have one, that's great. If not, we will explain how to set up an overcasting stitch on a regular sewing machine. You will also need an iron and an ironing board. Before starting work and cutting, the fabric must be pre-shrunk. To do this, fold it right sides together and press it with steam. Start at a low temperature and increase it as needed. Let's start cutting the fabric. Make sure to lay the fabric in a single layer with the right side facing up. This is because the skirt has an asymmetrical cut, and each piece must be cut in a single layer. Place the pieces on the fabric right side up. All pattern markings must be visible. Arrange the pieces according to the layout diagram in the instruction. Follow the grain line direction and ensure it aligns with the arrows on the pattern. They should be parallel. Place the waistband pieces as a mirror image and cut them with scissors, making small notches where needed, no longer than 2 to 3 millimeters. You will also need to cut interfacing pieces. Lay out the waistband interfacing pieces and the placket interfacing pieces according to the layout diagram in the instructions. Cut in one layer, ensuring the interfacing grain matches the pattern grain line. As a result, you should have one right front skirt piece, one left front skirt piece, one right back skirt piece, one left back skirt piece, 2 waistband pieces, and 1 waistband loop piece. From interfacing, cut 2 pieces for the waistband and 2 for the placket. Now, let's proceed to interfacing. Lay the pieces to be interfaced wrong side up. In this case, the waistband. Place the interfacing with the adhesive side facing the wrong side of the fabric. How to determine the adhesive side of the interfacing? Feel it with your fingers. The adhesive side has noticeable dots of glue applied at the factory. Here they are. On the right side, the fabric texture is smooth. Place the interfacing pieces wrong side to the wrong side of the waistband pieces. Using a steam iron, fuse the interfacing to the waistband pieces. Press the iron onto the fabric and hold for 5 to 7 seconds. Before fusing, test on a fabric scrap to avoid damaging the materials. First, set a low temperature, check if everything is satisfactory and if the interfacing adheres well, then proceed to fusing the main pieces. If necessary, use a cotton cloth as a pressing cloth, placing it over the piece first, then applying the iron on top. Use a lift and press motion to adhere the interfacing to the fabric pieces. After fusing, lay the pieces on a flat, firm surface, such as a table, and let them cool for 10 to 15 minutes to ensure the glue fully adheres to the fabric. Once the glue has cooled, trim the excess interfacing along the waistband edges. After fusing, check if the waistband has shrunk. Place your pattern over the waistband piece and compare its length and width. Everything looks good for us, but make sure to check yours too. Next, we need to fuse the areas for processing the cut-on plackets on both front skirt pieces. To precisely position the interfacing, mark the area where the placket will end. Here is one notch and here is the second one. When we press the placket at 1 cm, then at 3 cm, it will cover this area. This is the exact area we need to mark to ensure the interfacing does not extend beyond its borders. To do this, draw a guideline on the wrong side of the fabric, which will serve as a reference when applying the interfacing. This line is located 7 cm from the raw edge. Next, place the interfacing piece glue side down onto the wrong side of the left front skirt piece. This is the left front piece. Position and press it, making sure not to go beyond the marked line. Repeat the same process for the right front skirt piece. Fuse all interfacing pieces to the wrong side of the fabric pieces. As a result, you should have two interfaced waistband pieces. The placket area on the front left half of the skirt has been interfaced, as well as the placket area on the front right half of the skirt. On the wrong side of the front skirt pieces, make markings for pressing the placket seam allowances. First, mark the allowance for pressing at 1 cm, then at 3 cm. We orient ourselves by using reference mark 8 on the front right half and mark 4 on the front left half. Draw the first line 2 cm from the raw edge along the entire edge. And we mark the second line according to the notch and mark 8. We measure the width, it is 7 cm. As a result, we have a finished placket measuring 3 cm in width. Draw the second line 7 cm from the raw edge and extend it along the entire edge. I use a special heat erasable pen for marking, which disappears after pressing. Using the same method, mark the placket for pressing on the left front half of the skirt. First, draw the 2 cm line, then the 7 cm line, and then proceed with pressing. To secure the pressed allowances, use a wooden clapper if available. It helps cool and set the pressed allowances. Press the placket on the right front skirt piece in the same way. Next, place the back skirt pieces right sides together along the center edge. Match notches 1 and pin the edges together. So the center back edge and overlock the seam allowances. You can also pin the side edges at this stage. To do this, place the front skirt pieces right sides together with the back skirt pieces. Match notches 2 on the left side edge and notches 3 on the right side edge. Pin, aligning one side seam first, then the other. Now we will stitch all the vertical seams at once. So the first side edge, the second side edge, and the center back edge. This way, we save time by sewing all 3 edges at once. I use a denim needle size 90, a stitch length of 3 mm, and a straight stitch. Since our side seam is cut on the bias rather than along the straight grain, it should be sewn from the hem of the skirt up to the waistline. The second side seam should also be sewn from the hem up to the waistline. If sewn from the waist down, the side seams may stretch during sewing and create an unwanted wave. Before starting, always check your sewing machine settings. Ensure the thread tension is correct. Sew a test stitch on a fabric scrap to properly adjust your serger. If you don't have a serger, I'll show you how to do an overlock stitch on a sewing machine. Select a zigzag stitch. Set the stitch length to 2 to 2.5 mm. The stitch width can be 5 to 6 mm, and we must make a test stitch on a fabric sample. We make a test stitch and check the settings. I slightly reduced the zigzag to about 1.5 mm to make it denser. Before overcasting the edges, it is necessary to choose the correct side. Side seams are overcast from the front pieces side. Since the seam allowances will be pressed towards the back pieces, the center back seam is overcast from the left back piece side. Next, the seams need to be pressed. The seam allowances of the side seam should be pressed toward the back pieces of the skirt. The seam allowances of the center back seam should be pressed toward the left piece. When looking at the pieces from the wrong side, the seam allowances should be directed to the right. While we are at the iron, we will also prepare the hem of our skirt. For this, we need to mark and press the hem. First, mark the allowances at 0.5 centimeters and 1 centimeter. We mark along the entire hemline. The first line is at 1 centimeter, the second one exactly, at 2.5 centimeters. Now we press the hem allowance according to these lines. First, we press at 0.5 centimeters, then at 1 centimeter. Before changing the thread for top stitching, finish the hem placket corner. Fold the placket like this and mark the stitching line. How to do it? I will show it on the other side. Turn the inner side of the placket to the right side, fold on the mark, and pin at the bottom. On the wrong side of the placket, fold the seam allowance 1 centimeter on the mark and pin it. Next, mark where the stitching should be done. Then, sew along the marked line and trim the seam allowance down to 0.5 centimeters. You can also trim the corner to make it easier to turn out the placket corner and avoid excess bulk. Now the finished placket corner needs to be pressed, starting with the corner itself. Then, press open the seam allowances. After pressing, turn the piece right side out and carefully shape the corner so that it lays neatly. Like this, arrange the placket and seam allowance neatly. Now press the finished placket corner. This is how we get a neat, clean corner. Before making the decorative top stitching with contrast thread, we highly recommend testing the stitches on a fabric sample, checking the machine settings, and washing it in warm soapy water to ensure the thread does not bleed. Our thread is contrast red, and if it bled, you would see pink stains. Our thread is fine, so we proceed to the decorative stitching. Machine settings for decorative stitching. Use the decorative thread on top and match the bobbin thread below. Set a stitch length of 4 mm, straight stitch, width 0. Start stitching along the side seam from the back piece side. Top stitch the center back seam from the left piece side. Begin the stitch from the bottom edge to the waistline, and on the other side, do the opposite. Stitch 0.1 centimeters from the seam. This is how the stitch looks. I recommend not backstitching on decorative thread but tying knots and hiding the ends. This way, everything will be neatly tucked in, and a neat decorative stitch will be visible here. Fold the cut-on placket and pin it in place. The decorative stitching can be sewn from either the right or wrong side of the placket. I chose to stitch from the wrong side. I placed the decorative thread in the bobbin and the regular thread on top. This way, when stitching from the wrong side, the decorative stitch appears on the right side, and the thin thread stays on the wrong side. Stitch 0.1 centimeters from the edge. At the end of the stitch, I do not backstitch. I pull out the fabric. So the second decorative stitch 0.1 centimeters from the edge. After stitching, press the seams. After pressing, fold the hem allowances. Like this. Pin in place. Now we will sew the hem securing stitch. I will sew it from the wrong side. I start and end the stitch where the placket stitch ends. Stitch 0.1 centimeters from the edge. Finish the stitch and leave long thread tails. Pull the top thread to the wrong side. Tie the threads into a knot and hide them inside the seam for a clean finish without visible backstitches. Hide the threads inside the seam using a needle. Now the hem and decorative stitches have a clean, professional finish without unnecessary backstitches. Do the same on the other side. Now press the hem. The long thread tails at the waist edge can also be tied into several knots and trimmed so they don't get in the way. I do not cut the thread ends completely to the knot but leave about 1 centimeter. It will be hidden under the seam and won't be visible, but this will ensure the seam's durability and prevent the knot from coming undone and the stitch from unraveling. So, I always leave a small thread tail here. We have this piece for the belt loops. Cut it according to the markings and overcast the raw edges on both sides. Press the belt loop pieces and press the seam allowances to the wrong side by 0.5 centimeters. And this is how the belt loops look. After pressing the allowances, top stitch them by stitching 0.1 centimeters from the edge on both sides. Do this on all 3 pieces. This is how the belt loops turn out. Now, trim off the excess threads. Next, press the belt loops. Take the belt loops and pin them to the waist seam. Pin the belt loops at the side seams and the center back seam. Place them right sides together with the skirt, aligning them with the seam. Then pin them in place. Position the belt loop so that the seam is centered. Once sewn, it will look like this. Alternatively, you can align one of the top stitches with the existing seam top stitch. Like this. Both options are correct. Choose the one you prefer. Secure the belt loop with a backstitch, stitching 0.5 centimeters from the waist edge. Next, we will work with the waistband. Before attaching it, press the lower seam allowance on one of the waistband pieces. To determine which piece to press, I place the skirt on a mannequin. Pin it and position the waistband as it will look when finished. Like this. This will be the outer waistband piece. The other half of the waistband will be the inner piece. And this inner piece is the one we need to press now. Here is the allowance. To press the lower edge of the waistband as precisely as possible, I recommend marking it. Draw a line 2 centimeters from the edge. Then press the allowance at 1 centimeter. Now take the second waistband piece. Here it is, with the unpressed edge. Place them right sides together and pin along the upper edge. Align the notches. Now go to the sewing machine and stitch along the upper waistband edge at a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Secure the stitch with a backstitch at the beginning and end. Now trim the seam allowance down to 0.7 centimeters. Press the seam. Lay the pieces face down and flatten them. Press the seam allowances open. First, press the curved area. To shape it with an iron. Then flip it over and press from the straight side. Now fold the waistband wrong sides together. Fold along the upper seam so that it forms an edge. Not rolled over by 1 mm, but folded on the edge. So that both sides, right and wrong, look the same. Since the waistband will have 2 visible sides, it's important to align it perfectly at the edge. So when we stitch it, everything looks neat and even on both sides. Now we proceed to sewing the waistband to the skirt. Place the waistband right side to the right side of the skirt. The outer waistband piece is the one with the unpressed lower edge. The pressed edge is the inner waistband, and this is the outer. Pin it in place. Align right sides together and pin at the notches. Align notch 8 and pin it. Next, find notch 7, which is the first side seam. Align it precisely with the seam. Next, notch 6 marks the center back seam. Then, notch 5 indicates another side seam. And notch 4 marks the inner edge of the placket. Stitch the waistband to the waist edge with a joining seam. Sew the seam at 1 cm from the edge. Backstitch at the beginning and end. It is better to sew from the waistband side since it is interfaced. The waist edge is cut on the bias and may stretch. Press the waistband attachment seam. Press the seam allowances towards the waistband. After pressing, fold the waistband right sides together. Align our pressed fold with the seam to keep it level. Next, fold this part evenly. Align the notch and pin the edge. Repeat the same on the other side of the waistband. Now sew the short waistband edges, stitching to the placket end. So when turned right side out, the waistband edge becomes a continuation of the placket. Do the same here, stitch from the upper seam down to the placket. The stitching should end exactly level with the placket. Backstitch at the beginning and end of the seam. As you can see, I finished the stitching exactly level with the placket. Now, using scissors, trim the seam allowance to 0.7 cm and clip the corners. This is essential for a cleaner turnout. I am not clipping this corner yet, I want to check how it lies first. If it's too thick, I will trim it later. Turn the corner inside out. Use a needle to shape the corner. If the result is not neat enough, consider clipping this corner further. The waistband edge should be exactly level with the placket, this is very important. Now, fold the seam allowances inward and tuck them inside the waistband. Secure them with pins or hand stitches before sewing the final decorative stitch. Do the same for the other corner. If you struggle to turn the corner neatly, trim both this allowance and this one. That way, the corner will turn out neater. Use a needle to adjust and pull the corner out carefully, as the seam allowances are trimmed, and be careful not to pull them out. Press the waistband corner, and this is the clean, sharp corner we get. Now, baste the lower edge of the inner waistband by hand before top stitching. Next, I recommend making this guiding thread. This will help you stitch accurately, especially at the corners. When sewing over thick fabric layers, the machine may struggle, making it difficult to stitch evenly. I'll demonstrate this on the other corner. Take the waistband corner, use a thicker thread, and make one stitch through the corner. This will make sewing easier. Now, install the red contrast decorative thread on both the top and bobbin. Adjust the machine settings. Set the stitch length to the maximum, then test the stitch on a fabric scrap. Once the stitch quality is set correctly, ensuring both sides look good, proceed with top stitching along the lower edge of the waistband, 0.1 centimeters from the edge. I recommend starting the stitch from the side or at the center back so that the top stitch looks neat and even. I usually start at the back. Do not backstitch at the beginning or end, leave long thread tails and hide them inside the seam. Be cautious when sewing over thick layers to avoid breaking the needle. You may need to turn the handwheel manually. Don't rush this area. Here, at this point where we turn the stitch and begin sewing along this waistband edge, it would be best to make the stitch as a continuation of the one that goes along the placket. So here, carefully position the needle and slowly turn the handwheel manually to get an even stitch. We approach the turn here, going literally stitch by stitch to make it as neat as possible. Leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, turn the piece, and now, using this threads, hold the waistband corner and begin stitching. Then, continue top stitching around the entire waistband at 0.1 centimeters, as shown here. I approach the corner again, carefully turning the last few stitches by hand, adjusting with the threads, turning the waistband, and gently pulling the threads to make the corner neat here as well. Once again, I turn the piece and finish the top stitching at 0.1 centimeters. At the end of the waistband top stitching, ensure that the last stitch precisely aligns with the first stitch to create a seamless, continuous line. Make the final stitch, pull the threads through without backstitching, and leave long thread tails. Tie them into a few knots and use a hand needle to tuck them inside the seam. Now, remove all temporary basting threads. The waistband must now be pressed thoroughly before attaching the belt loops. Press all top stitches. Next, mark the seam allowance on the belt loops, 0.5 to 0.7 centimeters, depending on the type you made. Fold the allowance, pin it here, and stitch. Then, sew a securing stitch on the machine, either matching the fabric color or in a contrast color. I will be using a matching color. After securing the belt loops, the skirt must be pressed and given a final steam treatment before adding buttons or snaps. Now, mark the placement of the snaps on the placket and waistband. To do this, use a pattern to measure the distance between snaps and transfer the marks to the placket. Remember to account for the 1 cm seam allowance at the waist edge. The first snap will be positioned at 7.5 cm, with all subsequent snaps spaced 8.5 cm apart. Mark these points on both the left and right plackets. And you also need to mark the points for snap installation on the waistband. And here is the resulting marking for the snaps. To install the snaps, you need to make a hole in the center of each cross mark, where the snap cap will be inserted. You can do this using a 2 mm punch and a press, or manually with scissors or a thread snipper. I'll now show you both options, and you can choose whichever is more convenient for you. The first method requires a punch tool and a base for it. Screw the punch into the top and place the base underneath. Place the garment face up and align the punch with the center of the cross mark. Press the handle and the hole is ready. Now just remove the fabric piece from the tool. The second method is to carefully cut the hole with scissors or a thread snipper. The hole should be no more than 2 mm. So do this carefully. The hole must be small, just big enough for the snap post to go through. This is how it will be inserted afterward. Don't make the hole bigger, otherwise the snap will fall out. This is the punch method. It results in a cleaner hole. Choose your method and make holes at all marked points. After that, you can install the snaps. Snap tools, just like the snaps, come in 4 different parts. You need to match the correct pieces and install them in the press. The top snap part is smooth, and this is the corresponding fastening piece. To the bottom part of the snap, this one is placed below, and this one above. We install one of the pairs and will be installing the snaps. Let's first install the front side of the snap. Place the front part of the die on the bottom, and screw the back part into the top. Now take the snap parts, identify the front side, the cap, and pair it with the matching inner part, the socket. This part goes into the top of the die, and the cap part sits in the bottom. The socket goes face up. Next, determine which skirt half is the top layer. When fastened, this one will be on top. According to the pattern, this is piece 1. So the top side of the snap should be installed here. Place the skirt wrong side up. This is how it will be positioned and look afterward. So place the garment right side down. Press the handle and attach the top snap part. Now the top part is installed. Repeat this process for all snaps. The front part of the snaps is now installed. Now we need to install the back part of the snap. There are also 2 parts of the die for it. This is the bottom part of the die, and this is the top part. The back part of the snap also has 2 pieces. The inner one that touches the body, and the outer part that locks in place on the front side of the placket on skirt piece 4. Insert them into the die this way. Now place the garment face up, this is the right side, and install the remaining snap parts. This is how it looks, and it will fasten like this when finished. Install all the snaps this way. After installing the snaps, carefully press the garment to remove any thermal paste marks and give it a final steam press where needed. If you don't have a press for installing metal hardware, you can replace the closure with buttonholes and buttons. To do this, you'll need a special presser foot for sewing buttonholes and matching buttons for your fabric. The buttons should be no more than 1.5 centimeters in diameter. In my case, I chose these red ones to match the top stitching. Make a test buttonhole on a fabric scrap using the special buttonhole foot. It looks like this. Mine looks like this, yours may be slightly different. After sewing the test buttonhole, check if the button fits through it properly. Cut the buttonhole and pull the button through it. See if everything looks good. Then mark the placement for buttonholes on the actual garment. For example, I made these sample fabric pieces. They imitate the placket. Here is the right front, and here is the left front piece. Let's imagine it this way. I've labeled them for clarity. Now we need to measure the final buttonhole length, in this case, 2 centimeters. So, when we do the marking, we first mark the centers, just like we did with the snaps. Mark the center point first. Here will be the center of the buttonhole. Mark the start and end points of the buttonhole. The total length is 2 centimeters. So we mark 1 centimeter to each side of the center. Mark the start and the end of the buttonhole. On the left front piece, mark the center points for sewing the buttons. The buttonholes will be on the right front piece, the buttons, on the left. I've installed contrast thread on my machine. I decided to sew the buttonholes with it. I also placed the same contrast thread in the bobbin. Next, I set the machine to buttonhole mode. My machine has an automatic setting. Settings may vary depending on your machine, since each model is different. So the way buttonholes are sewn may also vary. I set the widest stitch width. Stitch length is set to approximately 0.5. But you will need to make adjustments during the process, of course, and make a test sample before sewing the buttonhole on the actual garment. Now I install the buttonhole foot. There's a lever at the back to remove the standard presser foot. Then I attach this foot into the slot. Place the fabric piece under the foot. We position the needle so that it hits this mark we made. In my case, the buttonhole starts here, so I align accordingly. Next, I have a special lever like this one, which needs to be lowered down and then pressed before starting the buttonhole. Now the buttonhole is sewn automatically. I just monitor the process. This is the result. Repeat the same for the remaining buttonholes. Next, press the buttonholes and cut them open. I usually do this with snippers, but use any tool that works for you. Cut carefully so as not to damage the stitches. Now hand sew the buttons. To do this, we make a tack stitch in place first, making sure not to pierce through the entire garment. Sew the button depending on its type, either with holes or on a shank like mine. And this is what a button and buttonhole closure looks like. Fasten everything, the skirt is now complete. So this is how you can substitute snaps with buttons and buttonholes.
Your fly skirt is ready. Enjoy wearing it.